Rolling. Right, okay. The lesson is officially underway now. I think everyone has entered the room, so let's get rid of that. And let me share my screen with you. Okay. Right, okay, guys. So I am going to leave the chat window just open in the corner there because I'm going to use that in a minute. So what I want to do today, there's not going to be a huge amount of presentation from me in terms of the usual, you guys are silenced and I do all the talking. What I'm going to do is talk about inspiration, where I get mine from, and give you maybe some help in terms of where you might find your inspiration. Because I think when I started my journey, where many of you guys are at the moment, I perhaps rather naively assumed it all to be a technical thing. I felt that as long as I was technically competent and I could master a camera and I understood composition, that would be all I needed. And what I've discovered, again, later into my photography development, is that I'm actually quite inspired with my photography from cinematography. And now I find myself watching things that I find visually pleasing, even if the plot is average, which I tend not to compromise too much. So if something really is dire and it's just pretty, then I probably won't bother with it. But there's plenty of good stuff out there. And we've all probably been, well, I say we all, that's probably not true. There's many people that have been busier than ever in the last 12 months. I'm not one of them, obviously. So I have watched a lot more film and TV than I ever have before. I'd say in the last 12 months, I've watched more stuff than probably the previous 5 years combined, and that's not an exaggeration. So I've drawn a lot of inspiration from that over the last 12 months, and it's kind of kept my fires lit in a way. And I just think that it's something that very few photography training courses are going to talk about this, and I think it's really important. So please don't think you need to go and watch the stuff or look at the artists that I'm going to talk about, but I think it might show you, it might get you questioning your own motivation and what sort of stuff is your eye drawn to, and what stuff are you watching on TV that you're finding is stimulating your creativity. I think it's probably a better term. And if that can get your creativity flowing, then it's well worth doing, and I think it's often overlooked. So I want to spend a bit of time doing that, and then what we will do, we will have a bit of a longer Q&A session, which I want you guys to be interactive, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that you've found a challenge over the last few weeks in terms of your getting control of your camera, getting control of manual mode and all of those things. I've seen some stuff about focusing. I know some of you are still struggling with that, so we can talk about that. And those of you that are still finding getting exposures right, we can have another look at that as well. But I kind of want to throw it to the floor a little bit and make sure that's productive time. That I'm not going over stuff that's already clicked for you. I don't want to assume anything. So this should take probably half an hour, and then we will have a look at your images from the last homework project, and we will open up the floor, as I said. So you can get inspiration from anywhere, but usually visually it's going to come from three places. It's going to be from art, other photography, or film, or TV. So way. Right. So in terms of photography, this is just one photo, and I was shown this photo by one of what I consider to be the world's top wedding photographers, who started life as an actual photojournalist. He worked for the newspapers in America, where he lives in the Midwest, and his first professional photography was going and photographing strange things happening in a small town. Initially, it wasn't particularly exciting stuff. It might be a record-sized turnip grown or something like that. But he realized after a while that there was a real art to capturing everyday people in everyday life. He went on to become a wedding photographer and became incredibly successful. Quite amusingly, some of his first images from his first few seasons are comically bad. He was very honest about sharing that. But anyway, this particular photo is one from, I think it's from the 70s, and it was taken by a photographer called Sam Abel. Just imaginatively just called Cowboys, but there is a lot of stuff here that we've already covered in our compositional talks. And for me, there is so much going on in this one frame that it kind of just, every time I look at it, my brain kind of gets lost in it. You've got amazing layers here. You've got, obviously, depends how you want to break it up, but there's at least 3 layers. Maybe you could split this into 2. So you've got this chap here and the steer, and the guy who's going to work on the steer. You've then got this action going on behind, where another steer's been wrestled to the ground, and then you've got perfectly framed between them this other cowboy and his horse observing what's going on. And if that wasn't enough, this is all perfectly framed as it is, and you can see everything nice and cleanly in between, you've got a red bucket in the corner of the frame to add a little bit more interest as well. So there's so many stories going on in one image here. And I've never at a wedding managed to capture an image with this much going on in one go. And I probably never will. If I do, I'll win an award for it, I guarantee you. Because this is documentary photography at its absolute best. No one's looking at the camera, no one's putting a silly face. It's all happening organically. This was shot on film, which makes it even more impressive. So this guy didn't have burst mode on a DSLR like I do. He didn't take 40 frames of this and just pick the best one. He thought about this, looked through the viewfinder, decided when he was going to take the image, and absolutely nailed it. So this is the sort of thing that inspires me, and this inspires me to be a better documentary photographer. This inspires me to think about using layers, to think about my composition, to think about my timing, and to really observe what's going on right through the scene and make sure that I get the best possible image from it. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of Roger Barlin. He's an American photographer who traveled around South Africa in a period, I think it was between the early 80s and the early 90s, may have been later than that. And he was traveling around a lot of the impoverished township areas, just taking photos of really odd things and quite odd looking people. And this is, I guess, kind of macabre in as much that I've often wondered why this kind of photography fascinates me, because there's no amazing light here. It's not textbook composition, but it's fascinating, for me at least. And I think it's probably something to do with the fact that I photograph people for a living looking their absolute best on their wedding day, with, surrounded by loved ones, happiness, romance, emotion, and people are looking perhaps wealthier than they would do in their everyday existence, because a wedding is kind of all about showing off. It's about looking your best, drinking your best champagne, and spending a lot of money on all the people you love. And this is the complete opposite. This is people that are living in complete poverty, many who have mental illness, who are just being themselves. And it's anything but pretty, and it's not glamorous, and he's not photographing these people to make them look good. He's photographing them as they are, and in many cases making them out to look even more strange and grotesque than they probably really are in reality. And I think this is escapism for me, to get away from the constant pressure of making brides look amazing. And I kind of like to dive into the stuff that I could probably never do at weddings. And it's not like I'm going to take this inspiration and apply it in my wedding photography, but it's something that interests me. And, I've got a massive, great book of this guy's work, and it's just fascinating reading about how the images came about. And I think what I'm gonna do is I've got a link. I'm gonna put it in the. So I've got two short videos that I want you guys to watch, and I'm thinking that the sound is going to be really poor if I play it through my laptop. There's no guarantee my microphone's going to pick up the sound and transmit it and everything else. So I'm going to send the link in the chat, and I'm going to sort of count down and go, okay, 3, 2, 1, click, watch it. Make sure your microphones are off. You might want to turn the volume down on this so you don't hear mine coming through the speakers. So actually, don't turn the volume off. You won't be able to hear your own. I'll turn my microphone off and I'll watch it so I know when it's done, and then we'll come back on. I'm probably going to work out a better way of doing this one day, but for now, this is going to have to be it. So let me just remind myself that everything sort of disappears when I want it to. I can't access things. I just want to be able to get out of this screen. Something. Bear with me, guys. Having technical difficulties again. And now it's great. It's got subtitles, which I don't want. Let's try again. What I want to do is shrink the screen. There we go. This is rather pitiful. I'm sorry about this, guys. Bear with me. Someone knows how to just. Let me have a look. Someone's talking to me. What I want to do is shrink this. Stop screen sharing. Just shrink, please. Exit full screen. Right, there we go. Okay, right. Putting the link hopefully in the chat. If the chat comes back. There we go. Right. Okay, hopefully, guys, you've got the link. Someone just give me a thumbs up to say it's in there. Excellent. Right, we have the link. So we will click on it. I will mute my mic, and we will adjourn at the end of this video. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, and watch. Okay, I'm back in the room. Let me just shut that down. And get the presentation back.
I came to Arles in 2002 to receive the Photographer of the Year award. And during this time, I had a lot of free time. And I ended up at a cafe across.
So I should be unmuted, so you should be able to hear me again, guys. Right, so that's, yeah, that's Roger Barlin. So pretty strange stuff, but, and, you know, again, not something that I necessarily have tried to recreate. Would be pretty difficult unless I'm going to go wandering around in 1980s South African slums. But still, even so, fascinates me, and I think just the human form in strange ways is probably the thing that probably does it for me as a portrait photographer. Moving onwards, so what I want to do now is look at some of the cinematography that's really inspired me over the last few years. Some of you guys might have seen some of this stuff, and I would say that you know, if obviously I know there's at least one young person here on the course who I probably wouldn't recommend watches some of this, and I'm sure her parents wouldn't let her. But I think for those of you that are north of 18, there's some pretty amazing TV that if you haven't watched this would be highly recommended. Handmaid's Tale is pretty well known, absolutely beautifully filmed, some amazing use of color, and that's what I've kind of singled out here for this. The use of the red with the gowns that the handmaids wear, and how that's sort of contrasted throughout the series with various other colors. So there's a lot of you can see how obviously, you know, you've got some fruit here, so you've got the compositional element of the diagonals, the triangles formed, but also the strong contrast in the color. These amazing white, I can't remember what they're called now, but sort of hats that they wear just contrast so brilliantly with the red. And here you've got the very sort of bleak, sort of almost diluted colours behind that the red sort of stands out against. And there's so many examples in Handmaid's Tale of where they've thought about composition and how they use those colours. Some of the lighting, like this photo here, is just amazing. But it's just absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful bits of film I've ever seen, and a really good watch as well. Quite tough to watch in parts, but it's brilliantly acted. Just one of the best things I've seen on a screen in years. American Gods, definitely not one for the kids, not one for the squeamish either. This is something I'm watching at the moment. I haven't watched all of it, but there is some amazing lighting in this. They've obviously had a huge budget for this. It's exquisitely put together. It's quite a bizarre show. It's really gory in places, so you've got to have a pretty strong stomach. Pretty strong language. Pretty much nothing's off out of bounds on this one, but it is absolutely brilliantly filmed. And if you can stay with all the plot twists and the gore and the swearing and the violence and everything else, it's a pretty good show. For me, it's the way it's lit is the thing that sort of stands out. You know, there's some amazing compositions here with these two images shot very similar, good bit of symmetry side on, but you know, this light coming through the window here, which has probably been boosted with studio lights almost certainly, but it's just absolutely lovely. And down here, you know, in what would be a fairly gloomy room, the use of their video lights is just exquisite. You know, the way that they've done it in a way that there's nothing burnt out. It's just all really subtle, and they've sort of retained the the sort of the ambience of the scene with the lighting. Here, in this scene here, there's a lot of this. There's a lot of backlit, a bit like the backlit flash photos that I do at weddings. They use this effect a lot where they backlight this rain. It's probably fake rain, but they dramatize it by firing loads of light through it, so it looks even more dramatic. I haven't yet taken a photo of a groom being hung on his wedding day, so I haven't quite replicated this look, but if I ever do go for the hanging from a tree look, this is the way I'm going to light it. This one here is more about the symmetry, just triangles everywhere, lines, just brilliantly symmetrical, but really well lit as well, almost like a softbox kind of lighting, but just such a strong composition. And yeah, if you don't mind your viewing kind of on the edge and you've got a pretty strong stomach, then I would recommend it. It's worth a watch. Now, in terms of some older stuff, Stanley Kubrick, who's a famous director, produced some of my favourite movies of all time, of which there's a few of them here. His use of leading lines and triangles is as good as anything I've seen, and it's pretty consistent. You'll see a hell of a lot of it through a lot of very famous scenes in films. Obviously, you've got The Shining here, which is probably one of his best-known movies, and again, using these leading lines or triangles throughout, the choice of lens that they film with, fairly wide angle to exaggerate that, and having this beautiful symmetry and a clear point of focus with the dead twins. And moving down to Space Odyssey 2001, again, there's several examples in this movie of these leading lines pointing to the center. You've got obviously this very strong color here with the red suit, and then the neutral colors around. So very, very strong composition. Over to the top here, you've got Full Metal Jacket, which is a Vietnam War film, which again, there's a few examples. I've seen a few other images where they've used these amazing leading lines here to compose. And finally, another one from The Shining below, again using the same sort of technique. So it's consistent techniques, but you'll see through a lot of his movies, you will see this. It's not just these frames, but it comes up consistently. And there's something sort of special about it, I think. And as I say, until I'd seen these movies years before I was even a hobby photographer, let alone a professional photographer. So it's great when you come across this stuff later down the road and you can look back and go, oh my God, yeah, that's why that is so amazing to look at. And I think that's the thing for me. And so I find myself looking for these lines when I'm photographing. I'm trying to see if there's symmetry, see if I can create triangles, see if I can lead the eye through the frame. Breaking Bad, another very popular show. So you've been around for a few years now, but the lighting and the composition in this is amazing. Particularly, I focused on the composition here. Michael Slovis is the director of cinematography, and his use of symmetry and balance is exceptional. And you can see in 3 of these images how it's worked, how they've balanced the frame, and you've got character here in focus, character behind out of focus, but it's just split down the middle. Again, an obvious one here, and again this one here where you've got the lighting from one side, but again it's perfectly symmetrical. And again, you've just got a simple use of a triangle here. You wouldn't notice this when you were watching it necessarily. It wouldn't jump out at you. But you can just see examples of really clever composition, threes like we've talked about before, but the way that they're framed within that sequence, which just makes it so much more interesting. And Better Call Saul, which was produced, I believe this one was a prequel to Breaking Bad. So produced after Breaking Bad, focuses more on Saul Goodman, the lawyer. Everything's sort of built around him. But the the story predates Breaking Bad. So if you watch Breaking Bad and then watch this, it sort of makes sense. If anything, I would say that Slovis was even more on his game with his filming for this. While there's not maybe quite as much action as Breaking Bad, and it loses some of the characters of Breaking Bad, I think the cinematography in this is arguably even better. It's absolutely exquisitely filmed, and it's just a joy to watch. You can see examples here where everything's here. You've got the symmetry here. You've got this silhouette lighting here with brilliant framing against this sort of grid of glass. You've got a triangle here, and you've got the rule of three again. You've got the symmetry. You've even got the car headlights here. It's just absolutely perfectly framed. And there's some amazing use of light in Better Call Saul as well, where one of the characters suffers from a form of phobia of electricity. So he lives in a house where there's no electricity, so the only light is through windows, and it's just brilliantly, so clever, the use of light in this. Any scene with him in this house where you've just got this filtered window light through Venetian blinds that they play with, and you'll see brilliant examples of rim lighting and backlighting. It's just gorgeous. And it's a pretty good show, to be honest. I'm not here to do film reviews, but it's a good watch. But it is beautiful to observe. So following on from this, I've got another quick video clip which shows you some examples of the cinematography for Better Call Saul. So I'm going to jump out of this and pop the link in the chat. So just bear with me a moment. We'll do the same as before. Chat backwards. There we go. Right. Okay, guys. So hopefully you've got that link in the chat. You can still hear me. I will mute my microphone. And if you want to give that a click now and watch that, then go for it. Okay, so hopefully everyone watched that okay. What I'm going to do is, if anyone had any problems watching that, or the people that are watching this back later, I'll put the links to both those videos in the Facebook group and also on the email once I've uploaded the video of this session, so you can watch those back if there was any problem there. Hopefully that worked okay. I think that would have been better than you watching it through my recording. I think it would have been, certainly the sound would have been pretty poor, if not the video quality. But I think hopefully you see what I see with that's some inspiring cinematography, and I do draw a hell of a lot of inspiration from watching stuff like that. So while I'm enjoying watching a lot of this stuff, it's maybe just giving me ideas, and it's not like I'm sat there kind of writing stuff down or screen grabbing stuff, but I just find that when I'm then in a position to create something amazing, or in a wedding scenario, all of this stuff will be in my subconscious, and it will kind of help to make me think about trying something different, even if it's not replicating a scene from a movie or TV, but it's all fuel for the brain. And the more you immerse yourself around good photography and good videography, the better your photography will get. It's as simple as that. If you were never exposed to good photography or good videography, you're going to progress at a much slower rate. I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I don't think people realize the value of watching television and going to galleries and looking at books. I think is massively underestimated. So that was the purpose of that. The final thing that I'm going to show on the slideshow today was just something sort of compositional. I teach this to wedding photographers. So the photos here are all examples of obviously wedding photos. But I thought I'd share this with you, and it's really just a reminder. And what prompted me to put this up is obviously I've started to see a little bit of a volume from work from you guys and what you've sent me over the last few weeks, and there is that I'm seeing a lot of really good stuff, but I'm seeing a reluctance to get near your subjects, particularly with portrait photography. Landscapes slightly irrelevant, but portrait photography is so key to get close to your subject, and all of you need to get closer to your subjects. So fill your frames. Yeah, fill your frames. Don't, if compositionally dead space is adding to the image, that's fine. If it isn't, fill your frames. Tell the story. Don't have, like in this image here, if I'd gone with a wider angle, or if I step back 2 feet and I got loads of this barn in here and a load of wall down here, it would be adding nothing. It's just more background getting in the way of the image. So get in tight. You've got 3 heads here telling the story. Get in as close as you can. But for me, I wanted to keep her hair, her jacket being blown, the brolly in. So that's why it's framed the way it is. In here, there's nothing. I haven't got the arm of the bride here. I don't really need it. It's all about the faces. This image here, I've cropped the sides of the heads, but they're not in focus anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This one here, again, it's wide angle. I've got some of the groomsmen throwing the groom up in the air, but I'm low, I'm wide, I'm right up in the action. And here as well, didn't have any choice. I was sat in the back seat of the Triumph Stag, which is no place for a 6'8" wedding photographer to be, I can assure you. Actually, Joe's going to recognise this photo if he's on the call today. But again, the story is getting in close to your subjects, getting wide, and as I say, in this case, I didn't have a choice, but in these I did, and I deliberately got close. So shoot wide angled. When you go in close, shoot wide angle. Shoot to tell the story, and you get more environment, you get more front to back sharpness, and you're going to look more like you're in the moment rather than sniping it like paparazzi miles away with a long lens. And don't be afraid to get close to your subjects. I am paid to do this. I have to, and sometimes it feels a bit uncomfortable because I'm, contrary to popular belief, I'm a natural introvert. I'm not an extrovert personality. I have to be in my professional guise. So when I go to weddings, I put on a bit of a sort of a almost like a sort of a cape and just become Mr. Sociable. But I need downtime. I need to get away from people. I need to rest, and I like a bit of time on my own. So it's not naturally easy for me to thrust myself into the faces of people because I'm not a hugely confident person in everyday life. But my job forces me to be that person, because if I wasn't, I wouldn't be successful at it. But I think, with your family, people that you are comfortable being around and who aren't going to slap you around the face necessarily, you can afford to get closer to them. If you're photographing your kids or your pets, get closer. I promise you, your photos will be better. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give you a homework assignment so I can then jump out of the presentation, because everything else, well, actually, I might come back into the presentation to talk specifically about something, but I'm going to cover the homework now. What I want you guys to do for next week is I want you to, again, shoot in manual mode. I want you to send me a RAW file if you can. Those of you that are able to shoot in RAW or know how to set your camera to shoot in RAW, and I want you to take a landscape photo. I'd like you to take a fresh one if you can, and I want you to take a photo of a person or a pet if you can't photograph a person, but I prefer a photograph of a person. It's going to make it more relevant for me to edit that. The reason is I will give them the usual constructive critique, but I will also do an edit on them, because the next week's session is about editing. And I think it's more relevant for me to edit your work than it is to edit my own work. So I want to show you what can be achieved in Lightroom, and it will help me if you can provide RAW files. So when I send my weekly email out, I will give you instructions on how you can get those RAW files over to me, because they will probably, if you're shooting with SLRs, and most of you are, they're going to be quite big, usually too big to email. So you can send them over by WeTransfer, and I'll send you links to that. Super easy to do. So if you can send RAW files, great. If you need me to help you get your camera set to do that, it should be fairly simple for those on SLRs. Those of you using less advanced cameras, I still think most of them will do it, but if they don't, I will accept JPEGs. But if you can send them unedited, the whole point is that I get to do the editing for you and show you how it's done. Okay. So
Rafe,
yes?
what does RAW file stand for?
I can't know what RAW stands for, if I'm honest. That sounds really unprofessional of me, but I've never needed to know. But basically, is that Vanessa?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, hi Vanessa. It's an uncompressed file. So when your camera takes an image, if it's set to photograph in JPEG, what it will do is it will compress the file within the camera and give you a compressed JPEG file, which will have some basic, like, automatic editing things applied to it. A RAW file looks, for all intents and purposes, more raw than a JPEG. What you actually see, and this is where it gets a bit confusing, on SLR cameras, what you see on the back of your screen when you review your image is actually a compressed JPEG preview of the file you took. You don't see the RAW file. The RAW file will look similar, but it might look a little bit more washed out in color, and it won't have any sort of finishing touches applied to it. But a JPEG is produced in the camera for people that generally don't have the editing software or skills to do that. So it tries to make some assumptions, give you a slightly more polished looking file. Everything in phones is JPEG, obviously. Again, your phone will make some assumptions. You can then further edit in a phone and add various things now, depending on how big your phone is. The editing tools get better and better with each generation. But a RAW file for me is all I ever use for my images, because I've got some presets in Lightroom that I apply, which again, I'll show you all this next week. So if you can't do a RAW file, send me a JPEG. I'll still be able to work on them and do some stuff. If you can send me RAW files, brilliant. If you're having problems during the week, drop me an email and I'll try and help you. But most cameras, when you go into your menu, it will have things like large JPEG, small JPEG, medium JPEG, small RAW, medium RAW, large RAW, usual on all the systems, whether it's Sony, Nikon, or Canon. I don't mind which one of those you go for. Any RAW file, even if it's a smaller one, will do. But you'll probably need to send it over through an upload like Dropbox or WeTransfer, because they're usually about at least 20 megabytes in size, sometimes more depending on the size of the sensor in your camera. So that is homework. Let me just come out of this and come back to the main screen. So I will come back to that if needs be, but okay, cool. So just looking at some of the chat, there's some stuff in there. I will catch up with that later. I don't want to read that now, guys, because you're all waiting for me to present. So what I was going to suggest now is I'm going to cover, I think what I'll do is I've been asked by at least 3 of you, or at least 3 of you have said that you're finding the focusing quite difficult. So with that in mind, I think I'll go over the bit in the presentation on focusing quickly, and then if there's anything else, you guys can chip in. I'll keep the chat open, or you can just unmute your mics and ask me, and I'll try and cover it. So I'm going to do a bit on focusing, then I'll get your files up and we'll have a look at those, and then any other business we can do at the end. Any other questions we'll cover off. So let me go back to share. Okay. All right, so back on the focusing section that we covered, probably don't need to linger on this. I think I've convinced all of you to try and trust your autofocus rather than try and manually focus. As I say, astrophotography and maybe macro photography might be the only time you go into manual focus mode. The key to getting your focusing right is going to be a bit more trial and error. I have taken as much control of the focus system on my camera as possible, but that's easier for me because I've got a camera that has a joystick and a touchscreen, and I've shot so many times over the years that I kind of intuitively know where I need to put the focus point. But even I will use, as I mentioned before, eye autofocus if I'm photographing a single subject, so that I know that it gets that sharp. So I've got various sort of cheat codes, I suppose, built into my camera, plus a knowledge that obviously means that my hit rate is going to be a lot higher than yours. I think the first thing I would say on this is do not beat yourself up for not getting your seagull's eyes pin sharp. Okay, you know, you're here because you're wanting to get better and you're learning, and the first time you go out and photograph birds, you know, zipping about, you're never going to absolutely nail it. It's hard to do, and if I had to go out and photograph seagulls flying around, my hit rate would be pitiful. But I'd probably get a few, and I'd trial and error a few things, and I'd find, all right, that lens isn't working, let's try that one. Okay, this focusing is, if I trust the camera a bit more, it's actually helping me because it's not seeing anything else in the scene, so it's locking on the bird. But it is not easy. It's not easy to photograph animals. It's actually a lot easier photographing people because the eyes are usually a bit more distinct. You'll find that your camera, if you have got some way of the camera automatically trying to look for an eye to focus on. If it's a bird with dark plumage and the eyes are dark, like a blackbird or something, it's going to be really hard for it to pick that eye out. So I think in that situation, you've really got to try and get your camera to a point where you are in control of that focus point. And if you are using the wider area, so if we move this forward, so we talked about the focusing modes. I still believe that our servo is the better route because it will take a photograph, it will focus on something that's static, but it will also focus on something that's moving. I don't see the point in having something that's only going to focus on something that's static because our servo will do that as well. But in terms of, so this was the stuff I wanted to kind of bring up again. So some of you said, when you had your your autofocus area set to multiple points, like here, for example, that it would maybe get the beak sharp, but maybe not the eyes. That is the compromise of using a wider autofocus area. You're not necessarily controlling the exact point that's going to be in focus. If your camera's got eye autofocus and it's intelligent software, those of you shooting with Sony A7s, I think a couple of you guys have got those, you've probably got an intelligent eye autofocus system built into that already. So if you can untap that and use it, you'll find that photographing people and animals gets a lot easier. But most of you guys are shooting like Canon 450Ds and stuff like that. You won't have eye autofocus built in at that price point. So your choices are really going to be whether you go with a single point and you try and nail it to the eyes or the part of the thing you're trying to photograph, or whether you are happy with a broader spectrum of focus points. But if you do this, as I say, the camera has got to make some assumptions, and it's not going to be smart enough to know that you want the eyes sharp. So you're going to get a bit of a mixed bag on that, and it is going to focus on stuff that maybe you don't want pin sharp. So I would advise in that case to go to a single point, but you need to make sure you're in control of where that point is. So you need to have the ability to move that point to the subject. And this is where I talked about back button focus before. I can't remember where I put that in here. Here, let's go back. See if I can find it again. If I came out of this. Way, bear with me. So back button focus is where you separate your shutter from your focusing button, because a camera, most SLRs are automatically set up that when you take them out of the box, they are going to, there we go. Right, so most cameras are going to, out the box, you can see here. So just an example on a Canon SLR, when you go to your custom settings, you will find that the shutter button, where the your index finger is going to fall over the top here, that does your focusing, and it does your metering, and it's your shutter release. But if you can separate that to just being your shuttering release, and you move your focusing button to one of these up here, any one will do. And on any other camera, I would say there's always a button here that does something. It's usually something, it's always something that's programmable. You can change what that does. Sometimes it's metering, start, or in this case, AF on is autofocus on, I think. But I've never used it for that. I just use it as my focus button. So you change it in the settings to just be your focusing, but you have to disable focus on your shutter button. That's the key thing. Once you've separated those two, what that means is you can hold focus on your subject and then recompose. So if you think about it, you've got your camera up in your hand, your thumb is doing your focusing on the back of the camera. So you lock your focus on your subject, and then you can move around, recompose, and then hit the shutter. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're finding that if you're focusing on your shutter button, when you focus and you recompose, quite often that focus then moves off the subject and you end up clicking the shutter and it will move the focus onto something else. But you can lock that focus with your thumb and then recompose and move it around, and then shoot. So for me, I would go with single point focus, so you've got full control, but you need to make sure you know on the back of your camera how you're going to move that focus point around. This is, I think, this is an R6 or a 5D. It's one of those. It's a fairly top-end camera. Looking at the fact it's got a joystick here. Not all cameras have these joysticks. If you have a joystick on the back, that's the best way to move your focus point around. And then you can, say, move that around with your thumb, take your thumb off the joystick button, and then hold focus on AF on, recompose, and shutter with your index finger. That's how I do it. I use the touchscreen with my thumb, actually, because I find it's more responsive than the joystick and I can move it quicker. But for years and years and years, I used the joystick before I had the touchscreen option on my mirrorless camera. So if you haven't had a play with back button focusing, don't give up on it. It will feel weird at first and you will miss photographs, and you've got to push yourself through it. I probably worked for, I think I did probably half a wedding season in 2015 without using back button focusing before someone showed me the light, and I suddenly realized, oh my God, I've been wasting my life, and I never went back, and I just found that my hit rate was way higher. So you'll get good images with, without setting back button focus, but I promise you your work will be better eventually, and you'll get more control, and that's what it's all about. It's all about getting control. So with focusing, just to recap, I think for me, you really want single point AF, which we've got here, and keep everything automatic, and try with back button focusing as well. I'm not going to go through metering again unless someone particularly wants to, because we only talk about metering when we're not shooting in manual mode, which is when you go on the naughty step. Okay, right. Let me jump out of that. I'll tell you what, guys, I'll stay in this presentation for now, but I'm happy to answer any questions on focusing, I think, while we're talking about it. So go for it if you've got one.
Hi, Rafe.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, the single point focusing. So I have tried that back button focusing that you talked about. And when I went online to look at the manual, it was saying when you back button focus, you can, I suppose, pinpoint the area you want the focus to be most clear, and then you can move your camera after you've back button focused, so that area stays focused, and then do your composition and then press the shutter, and then the area you initially back button focused will stay in focus. But sometimes I find it doesn't work like you said, and I suppose it's practice. But do you have any tips for how to make that better? Because I have, like you said, one of the old cameras, so I suppose I won't have all the newer features like IAF and things like that.
I think that yours is a 450D, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I've trained people who've had 450Ds, so I've had a sort of a look at one before, but I've never obviously had to go and photograph extended amount of time with one. But I think what you're probably finding is difficult is if you were to combine all of the things that can be problematic in photography at once, or you get a lot of those things happening. So if the light's coming from a challenging direction and you've got a cheaper SLR and you've got a kit lens on it, and you're trying to do back button focus with single point, and you've got subjects moving around and you've got all this stuff going on, then you're going to find that is really difficult. Not impossible, but your hit rate's going to be super, super low. And when you improve your gear, so when you get a more expensive, higher end, newer SLR camera, and you combine it with more expensive, faster focusing lenses that can deal with strong backlight better without hunting constantly, and you've got an autofocus system in the camera that is more advanced than the one you've got at the moment, then you're going to get more success with it. So it's also probably a little bit of user skill. And if I was to pick up your camera and, you know, go and try and show you, look, this does work, I'd probably get more frames in focus than you would, Aloho. I'm not going to lie. But I would get a lot less than if I was using my camera with my lenses because of the technical ability of that camera and the lens that I've spent a lot of money on. So it's a bit of everything, I think. I don't think I'm going to be able to give you a magic bullet single answer on that one. I think that if you've got the light in a position where it's not working against you, so if the light is maybe behind you or from the side, you're not going to have the camera hunting much.
Okay.
It's easier to lock focus. If you're shooting with one of your better lenses, I notice you have the 50mm 1.4, which is one I've got. That's quite a good lens. So that lens would focus a lot better than your kit lens, and quicker and more. It would have a higher hit rate. So if you're trying to do back button focusing, single point focusing, trying to get everything on the eyes, and you've got, you know, the sort of basic equipment and difficult light, I think that's probably some of the examples. I mean, like I said to you, you know, if I have to go and photograph pigeons or seagulls flying around, it's bloody hard. You know, it's hard, and I've got pro kit, and I'm, you know, I'm a full-time photographer by trade, but you know, some of this stuff is just tricky. Wildlife photography is going to have a much higher hit rate on that than I am, because I don't photograph seagulls for a living. So let's not forget, some of this stuff is quite difficult, and if you're on basic kit, that makes it more difficult. But give yourself a better chance by just shooting in favourable lighting conditions and practicing on subjects that are going to be more still, so they're not going to like, you know, seagulls are a bloody nightmare. They're white against a white sky. Your camera's like, what the hell am I supposed to be doing here?
Okay.
So I think maybe just give yourself a break and realise that it's a lot of things, that maybe you can increase the odds of a more successful photograph by making things a bit easier for yourself. And this goes for a lot of the lessons I'm giving you guys. Don't go out and expect to create unbelievable stuff straight away. You know, it's going to be a work in progress. This is not a get rich quick scheme. It's not a become an amazing photographer overnight scheme. It's a putting the building blocks in place that you guys can go away and practice. Without the practice, you will know, you know, I said from the get-go, you won't improve. This is why we do the homework projects. Sorry if that wasn't a magic sort of answer on that one, but I think that's probably unless
it was helpful. It was helpful because I've tried different things and I've looked at a couple of books as well, like different ideas. So I suppose it's practice, like you say, hopefully will make you better and better kids.
Keep practicing, keep going for it, and you know, if in the future, you know, you ever want to come in for a one-to-one lesson, you know, we can have a look at it and we can see if we can get more out of the camera for sure.
Okay.
Obviously, the limitations of a Zoom online training is that I can't now look at your camera and have a play with it and say, oh, well, the problem is you've got it set this way. So where I'm a little bit restricted. But obviously, once we're able to do, you know, face-to-face training, then things like that, hopefully, those things I can help with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no worries. Anyone else with anything on focusing before we look at the images from the homework, and then we'll come back to a Q&A after that in case there's any other stuff you'd like to go through. All right, let's look at homework while you're all being eerily quiet, and bring that up. Right, so we had the challenge of sending in a landscape and a nature image. So what we've got here, let's see, yep, that's all good. We've got some lovely triangles and leading lines on this one coming in from all angles. I think that probably, if we're going to have the sky as part of the image, we probably want to underexpose it a little bit more, so that we've got a bit more detail in the sky to pull out. And maybe we want to make the sky more of the frame. I'm always a little bit against the 50-50 split on the horizon, because it's a bit of a non-committal way of photographing a landscape. It's unless it's beautifully symmetrical or there's a reflection, you probably want, in this case, more of the foreground, so you can get more of the land, because the sky is kind of washed out anyway. This one here, there is a nice bit of reflection in the river. My OCD is telling me the horizon needs straightening slightly, so I think it would benefit from a little bit of that. But I like the fact there's a bit of foreground interest on the tree here. The exposure is well handled. It's lit how I would light it. I know that it was a bit of a flat lighting day here. There's no sexy sky or amazing sort of flare coming through from the sun. So it's difficult to, to get a great landscape image when you haven't got either an amazing sky or some cool light to work with. But compositionally, this is a good image, and I like the leading lines running through it, so that's good. So we've got some snowdrops here, and this is an example of one where I would say, so there's a few things that jump out to me here. Well, the first one is, unfortunately, is overexposed. You would benefit from. So on this one, I don't know if I'll be able to do much with the editing, but I mean, straight away, I knock the highlights down on here, and you suddenly, so this was how it was. If I pull the highlights down, it's retained some of that information on here. We can crop in a bit more, definitely on this, like so. And if obviously you had the Lightroom, you could also just, not that I'm suggesting that you should have done this, because it possibly can darken everything else around it. But when you're photographing something white, like I said to you before, anything with bright white, you need to underexpose so you don't lose the detail in the subject. The final thing I would say as well, probably going to hate me for saying this, but this would look a lot better if you were lying on the ground. Anytime I'm photographing flowers or plants, my belly is on the ground, I'm level with my subject, so that you can lose it against the backdrop. Because when you're stood up photographing down on a plant, the distance between the plant and the background is a lot less than if you're flat on the ground, and the background might be a hedge that's 20 feet away. If you're lying flat on the ground, that means you're going to blur this more and isolate your subject more. So I view plants, flowers, as I do animals and people. They're subjects, and they need to be isolated from the background, because otherwise they get lost in the background, which is kind of what's happening here. So as low as possible, nice and close, underexpose, and you get a better snowdrop picture. This looks like a red kite. In fact, when I say it looks like it, it is. Tell by the colours and the forked tail, and the fact that they're 2 a penny in the Chiltern Hills. So this is well caught, actually. I haven't got the metadata to tell me the shutter speed, but it's probably pretty high. Again, just crop in on this. I mean, I get that you probably couldn't get any closer to this with the lens you had. Probably quite a long lens anyway, but just a really simple crop just to bring it in. Now that I've brought that in, I'm looking at it, it's almost shot. I think it probably did focus on it. It just looks slightly, it may have been that you've cropped it loads anyway. Possibly that's why it's looking a bit soft. It probably wasn't a huge file that was sent anyway. But it's a good capture anyway, and not easy to do. Again, on these, just crop in. This one's got lovely light on it. Looks like it was late afternoon or early morning light. It's nice and warm. This one will probably benefit from putting the bird maybe on the third, just to draw the eye in a bit more. And you've got that beautiful red colour there. So which really stands it out, because if it wasn't for the red breast on the bird, it would kind of get lost in with the twigs. But you've got some gorgeous light on that, and again, these things move super quick, so it's not easy to get this focus. And I think the focus has hit the bird, which is good, because that wouldn't have been easy with all these twigs and the camera wanting to focus on one of those instead. So these were sort of carryover from the portrait homework. I know that the author didn't have the opportunity to send these through before, so I like the composition on here. I like the shooting through the vase, the vase, depending on where you're from. And again, you could probably pull it in a little bit tighter, but that's pretty good composition. The lighting's not great. You've got this orange casting from tungsten light, which is unfortunate. There's not much you can do, but it's well put together. And I don't even know what this is, but whatever it is, it's clearly focused cleanly on it, and it's separated from the background. So maybe this was for the depth of field bit. But again, just come in a bit tighter if you can, and you've got it clean against the backdrop, which is good. And some nice detail on these roses. I can tell these were shot in tungsten lighting by the orange sort of glow of these, so you can neutralize the warmth a bit and get it back to its more natural colors by sliding on the temperature slider. So probably something a little bit more like that, but loads of lovely detail in there, and it works well. And you've got the business part of the photograph that's in focus around the third as well, so good balance on that one as well. I really like this image. This was one of my favorites that I got sent. It's a very small image, so it's a bit pixelated, but I'm sure the full-size JPEG looks even better. But that's really well handled exposure, really interesting composition. I love the hand being open up there. It's balanced in the frame. The exposure is perfect. It's not too bright. You've captured some of the detail from outside in terms of the highlights have been retained. Just a really, really good image, that one. It's a shame it's not the full-size JPEG, so I could appreciate it a bit more. But yeah, lovely, really nice capture. Okay, got a landscape one here. I think this is another one where I don't know if this is the focus that's gone a bit iffy, or whether this is just another really small file. It might be just that it's a really small file. It might be sharp on the original one. But you've gone for the 50-50 horizon view, which I think on a blue sky doesn't work so well. I would suggest that even if you come out of 3:2 format like this, you could improve this just by doing that, make it more of a panorama. You just don't need all that blue sky, because it's not particularly interesting light. It looks like it's sort of middle of the day. It's not warm, sexy light, as I call it. But I think it could be a good composition. I think that even with the light being average, I think it could be improved. I know this is highly pixelated now, but I still think that looks a better photograph than how it was, just because you've got rid of a load of empty blue sky. This one I think is more successful. I find this one is actually balanced. I think it's deliberate. I know, again, that someone's going to go, well, you're contradicting your own rules here, Rafe, but this just works in ways that the other one doesn't. For a start, the light is a lot better. You've got this gorgeous detail in the sky, but you haven't got a 50-50 horizon, so that automatically works for me. It's nice and level. There's a nice bit of detail here in where the waves are meeting the shore. You've got a nice bit of headland, and you've got a nice balance of sky. There's not much I'd really do with that. I mean, you could go for that sort of composition. Maybe that would look a little tidier. You've still got a lot of the sky, but you've got the third on the horizon, and you've got really three very clear areas there. You've got the sea and the land, or the sea and the beach. You've you've got the headland and the cloud in the middle section, and you've got the clear sky above. So compositionally, I think that just doing that little crop makes a really good image even better. So we've got a nature one here. Again, these are really small files, so it's difficult for me to. But this one looks sharp. I mean, this looks like the seagull is pin sharp. I think the focus has done its work well. The light's kind of cool. I'll say what I normally say. You know, it would be better if you were facing the sand, but I appreciate that you don't always want to get covered in sand, and certainly don't want to get your camera sandy if you can avoid it. So I'm being pernickety, but I think if the bird was framed against the sea, a little bit lower, it'd look even better. But it is good. It's well exposed. It contains the exposure well, and the lighting is good. So yeah, that's great. Just bear with me 1 second, guys. This sounds stupidly unprofessional, but because I'm on my own, I'm going to put the oven on so that I can eat something before midnight. So I'll be back in 1 second. I told you I'd be quick. Right, okay, moving on. So this one is absolutely gorgeous. I'm seeing that now. There we go. So this is really, really lovely. And just looking at the settings on this, so definitely been used with a tripod because we've got a 15-second exposure. ISO is super low at 100. F8 for sharpness front and back. Just a beautiful reflection there. Just lovely. Really, really love this image. You know, the balance, the framing. You've clipped it just about right. You've left a little gap here, just under the reflection. Same here. I like this little curve here. Everything's pin sharp. It's perfectly exposed. Good job, sir. Really, really strong image.
Right. On something like that with such a long exposure, how would you know how long to estimate the exposure? Because it's, you know, it doesn't show up on your camera presumably when it's so long.
Oh yeah, good point. So there's two things. So if you have a traditional SLR, not a mirrorless one, you can put it on live view, and you can play around with your settings until you see on live view the exposure that you would need without actually pushing the shutter.
Okay.
I'm assuming that all the SLRs, even going down in the ranges, do have live view. Correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, if you've got a mirrorless camera, all you're seeing is a live view anyway. So with a mirrorless camera, what you see on the back of the screen is what you're going to take. Whereas obviously with a traditional SLR with an optical viewfinder, what you see through the viewfinder isn't necessarily what you're going to take. So mirrorless cameras is dead easy because that's what you're going to see anyway. Traditional SLR cameras use live view. That's what I used to do when I would do this sort of thing, and play around until you've got that exposure right, and then pop it on the tripod, set a 10-second timer on it, or 3 second if you're feeling brave, and off you go.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Right. This one here, which I definitely recognise because this is where I live, Hitchin, is so the first thing on this one. I think the focus has gone a bit wobbly on this one. I'm not sure if there's, because I can't see the metadata, whether the shutter speed was a bit off or whether the focus is just missed. But the tree probably should be in focus, but it isn't. It's looking a little sharper here, but still a little bit off. But I think in terms of compositional stuff, I like what the author's tried to do. But first thing I would always do is get that horizon level, and then I can breathe again. And I think for this one, just do that first of all. Again, you don't necessarily need all of the foreground, so it doesn't get interesting until we get to about here. So again, when you're doing your compositions. Have a think about, you know, what is the interest here, and the interest here is the tree and the town centre behind. It's not necessarily the grass, so you can kind of split.
If that was me with the I had it in manual focus, not autofocus. So yeah, the focusing is not quite right.
That explains it, Kate. Yeah, it'll be the manual focusing then. Excuse me. Yeah, I always recommend autofocus for any stuff like this. It depends what you're trying to do. I mean, if you were able to stop it down and, you know, maybe blur the background and single out the tree, you could do that. But I think there isn't enough interest in the tree to sort of isolate it. So I think with this, you probably want to focus more on getting the detail behind.
I sort of liked a bit of nature with the town in the background.
Yeah, no, I get it, and I think that you've got to make a conscious decision then what your focus point is going to be. Like I said, you know, is it isolate the tree, blur that, still have it in context, because you can still, if that was a bit blurry and that was sharp, you could still tell a story and say tree against urban landscape. If you have everything sharp, then the eye doesn't always know what to look at. This is why I talk about depth of field. So you either focus on the town and make the tree blurry, which I don't think could work as well. You focus on the tree, and you can see that there's still shots behind anyway, which I think would be a stronger image. So it depends what lens you shoot. If it's a long lens, you're going to find that's easier to blur the background. Obviously, it's wide angle, not so easy. But yeah, I see what you were trying to do now, Kate. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
So this one here, this is quite interesting. It looks very sort of muted. I don't know if this one's had much editing done to it, but a very sort of soft kind of lighting and lots of lovely detail. But it was shot at f4, ISO 100, so settings are all looking good. And the author has done what I would do, which is not have too much sky. Focus more on the countryside. Shot at 70 mil, so it's longish, just slightly north of 50 mil, so it's almost like an eye's view. Yeah, it works really, really well. I don't know what the scope for moving around was, whether you could have got a bit more of the church by moving that way, possibly, but maybe you'd lose the farm then. But the sky's contained, there's no highlights below. It's a very sort of gentle kind of low contrast image, but it kind of works well. So it's a good composition. And I like the silhouette factor here, which looks like it was done deliberately. I think if you were to expose for the feathers on the goose, you would definitely lose a lot of the detail in the water here. So it was a good decision with a bird side on is quite easy to identify. I think that's worked really rather well. I don't know whether you took lots of frames and whether there was one where the second bird was maybe upright. That might have worked a little bit better, just because this one's getting really close to the edge of the frame. So I'm getting a little twitchy about the lack of space here. That is the only thing I would say on that. But literally, I just want to move it kind of that way, just like a tiny bit, just to give that bird a little bit more sort of space around the edge of the frame. But I really like that in terms of the lighting's been really well handled, and all the sharpness is there, and you've got some lovely sort of ripple effect on the water. So yeah, really good image. Okay. So on this one, we have a nice reflection of the sky, bit of highlight loss in the sky, maybe could have underexposed just a tad, salvaged a bit more of the sky. Quite bright, but it is well exposed for the middle part of the image, so that's great. But I think just putting the highlights down a little bit in here, it's difficult in a JPEG, but it just maybe improves it a tiny bit. But there's some really strong reflections here, which I really like. So good job. Seems to be in a slightly, look like a 3:2 sort of format. So maybe it's been cropped in at the side. Obviously this one has it in square format, But that's a really good shot of a grey squirrel. And I like the fact that you've cropped in tight here. I think that's working really well. Looks like it's sharp. Looking at the settings, quite a slow shutter speed, f8. It's possible you could have kept your shutter speed a bit higher. I think if I was photographing a squirrel, I probably want more than 80th of a second on my shutter speed, because they do move quickly. So you could have either put your ISO up a bit, maybe gone 1600, and then you could have had a higher shutter speed, or you could have dropped your f-stop down to maybe f5.6, and that still would have been perfectly sharp at 5.6, and that would have given you more shutter speed as well. But even so, lovely image and really well captured. I really like this one of the two swans, really well exposed. Temptation here again is to make it too bright. You've got white feathers on a bird, and I think this has been captured really well actually. I love the expression on the birds as well. In fact, there's two of them, and this one's flexing his pecs. But more, I think for me, the light is really good, the exposure is really well handled, the ISO is super high. So I think on this one, although it looks really good, I would have said you didn't need to be at 12,800 if you're shooting at 1600. If these swans aren't flying, they're not moving massively quickly. This is not a robin or a wren or a finch. It's going to be like lightning speed. If that swan's where it is, we all know it's not going to be zipping off at the speed of light. So you could bring your shutter speed down a bit. You probably don't need to be at f10 either. You could drop your f-stop down quite a bit, and then you could reduce your ISO to probably 3200 or lower and still get the same exposure. So I'm glad there are examples of images like this, because it is a lovely image, don't get me wrong, but I can see, looking at the settings, how you could have got a better compromise on settings here. To be fair, the camera's done a good job at 12,800, I'm not going to lie, it looks pretty good to me. But I think that you could have improved the quality and reduced the noise a bit by bringing the ISO down and still retaining that exposure by tweaking your shutter speed down a bit and your aperture down a bit as well. Some croak eye. Is that the plural for crocus? I don't know. Let's say it is, so I'm correct. So just looking at the settings here, you've got the ISO nice and low, wide angle shot, f4, so it's sort of blurred behind, which works quite well. I quite like that. Yeah, it's really good. Again, I'll say what I always say: get as low as you can. I think maybe it's deliberate here that you've gone to a sort of an angle where you can see all the other crocuses behind. If you were completely flat, you might not be able to capture the expanse of them, so I get that. Again, it's a little bit too bright. If I bring the highlights down here, I think it just looks a little better when I sort of pulled it in slightly. But that's really the only sort of thing I would pick up on. The shutter speed is just about quick enough to be handheld, and your ISO is nice and low. So yeah, that's a good image. We've got some rams here, which all seem to have noticed you. I hope you escaped the field in one piece. Those horns look like they could do some damage, to be fair. But that's a really strong image. It looks like it might be up on the Chiltern Hills, that one. Who took it? Peter. So yeah, it could have been a local one. Looking at the sort of scrub around, just reminds me of sort of Pegston Hills, like that sort of way.
Pegston Hills, Rafe.
Oh, I guessed well. Pegston Hills. Look at that. I can recognise it by a branch. I'm not sure I've seen these fellas before, but I might go and have a crack myself at photographing them. I'd quite like to see how close we can get to one of these without losing a kidney. Could be fun. But yeah, I really like this one. You've got a good number of them in. That's probably as close as you were willing to get. Don't blame you.
We had the border terrier in tow. So I think
They were about to run away.
Yeah, no, they're probably more scared of you, to be fair. I wonder how, with a longer lens, whether you could have maybe isolated these three guys here and just made the image all about them, possibly. I don't know. It's just, I love things in threes, and my eye is drawn to this side of the image. I know that's kind of lost the quality a bit there, but these are the three that I keep looking at. So again, it's just come back. Yeah, so with this, as soon as I saw this image, my eyes went to him, then they went to, or her, I don't know, to this one and then this one, and then I kind of went down here and looked at these guys. And that was because these guys are more distinct in terms of they're clear against their background. They're all looking at the camera with some intent, and these guys are just a bit lost within each other and the shrub behind. So if I was going to crop on this, I'd probably just get it down to these three, or I'd use a longer lens, or get closer, or any of those things. But really good image, and you know, I love the fact they're all looking at you. That really adds to it. And I guess this was on the same photo walk, and looks like a log, so we've got a bit of a leading line here. Looks to me, you may or may not be able to confirm on this one, Vanessa / Peter, but the flash might have fired on this one. It looks suspiciously light around here.
Light in front, yeah.
Yeah, so I would always disable the flash in those circumstances. It makes photos that are supposed to be natural look less natural. And, you want this to sort of, if anything, be darker than your subject, which is the log and then everything behind. So turn your flash off in these circumstances, and it will make for a better image. Just see some wakes up. There we go. Okay, and the third one in the trilogy looks like another sheet one, and yep, it's the same, different sheet. I like the variety of coats on these sheets. In fact, you've got like a brown one, a black one, and a grey one. That's really good. Again, you've just got one looking at the camera. I think it works well. Horizon looks straight. You've got a nice sort of triangle here in the frame, which looks good. So it's a well-composed image. It needs a little bit more pop, but then it's not your fault it was a grey day and there wasn't much exciting light. I think if you'd gone there at the end of the afternoon on a sunny day, that would look a really good photo with the light lighting up their coats and everything else. So yeah, another strong image. That's good stuff. Okay, this one I really liked when it came through, and I think it's the decision of the author to not worry about making everything bright in the foreground. When you've got a tree without leaves, it provides you with a silhouette opportunity, and it means you can retain the detail in the sky, which they've done here really, really well. And I like the fact that's almost a silhouette, because all this detail in the tree is what makes this image. This is where all the action is here. And the fact that you retain some interest in the sky in the process is what makes it so good. There's a bit of detail here still, which is good, but we don't need this to be bright. This is perfectly exposed and it's perfectly composed, so great shot. This one here, again, we're looking at reflections, but I think what this one sort of lacks is a specific reflection. I think that if this was a little bit darker, you might have retained more of the sky detail. I'll see if I can pull some of it back, sliding the highlight slider. It does work a little bit more. But I think if you were able, and I'm not saying you could have done, but if you were able to get something reflected, maybe one of these houses, if you got down and got really low, you might have got a row of houses reflected in it. Again, you'd have probably got really wet and muddy, so I'm not going to suggest that you do get wet and muddy for my benefit, but I think if you want the perfect photograph, you can see how this roof is almost picked up in the reflection here. And if you'd have gone around this side a little bit more, got really low, you probably could have got this whole line of houses reflected in here. I think it would have made it a bit more interesting as a reflection photograph. Some irises in presumably a garden. They don't look like the wild variety, but I really like the strong blues here. It's been really well exposed. You've got three colours dominating this image. You've got greens, you've got blues, and you've got whites. I think that part of me thinks these are a bit distracting, but then part of me thinks that they're required as a third colour to balance the frame. So giving it the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to say that the intent to keep the snowdrops or spring snowflakes, I think they might be, possibly, can't tell which one of the two, are there deliberately to create a bit of almost like a tricolour kind of banding across the photo, which is what my brain saw as soon as I opened it. In that case, it works well, and the exposure for the blue is perfect, and compositionally it's quite nice. So yeah, it's good. Right, I absolutely love this photograph. The light is unbelievably good in this photograph, and this is why I'm jealous that the author lives up in Scotland, where these kind of photographs are possible, and that my best hope is that I could walk down Orton Head and get a photograph of a dog jumping in the river, which is not really the same. So this is lovely, and the only thing that I want to see more of here is this sky. It's exposed exquisitely well. Really like the underexposure element here. There's no detail lost in this photo at all. But I want to see less of these paving slabs and more of that sky and that horizon. And I think if you'd have lifted the camera up a bit, that would have been an amazing photo, because you'd still retain this light on the rocks here and this boardwalk, which is gorgeous. But this section across here doesn't add anything to the photo. You want the Loch Ness bit, that's telling the story. I think a crop here and add a bit more to the top, that would have been amazing. Sorry, Sophia, you were going to say something on that.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to just share. I was struggling when I was taking photos because it was raining and I didn't have a hood for my lens. So I got some really gorgeous pictures, but then there were raindrops on the lens. And this is why I quickly wiped the lens with my top, and then I pointed down a little bit and I just managed to get one shot. And then the other thing that I struggled with was in the background, the backdrop was of mountains, snow-covered mountains, but I tried my best, but I just couldn't seem to capture them. And I tried a higher aperture, but I'm not sure whether it was to do with the lighting or if maybe it was to do with my lens or something, but I just couldn't capture them.
In terms of focus, sharpness, or exposure? Which
way sharpness. And then I tried editing after. I took a few on my zoom lens and then edited after, but they just didn't look that great. And it's a shame because the mountains here are gorgeous, but I just can't seem to. I got my iPhone out actually, and my iPhone captured some of these photos a lot better because I guess it does everything automatically for you.
Yeah, well, that's the iPhones. They correct a lot of the mistakes that photographing manually might maybe make an error on. So I understand what you're saying, but I think you've got the exposure spot on this bit here, which is why I kind of want to see more of it. The sky's great, you know, the sort of the light sort of hazing through the showers in the distance. It's all good. It just needs lifting up. That's all it needs, I think, this image. But you know, when the weather's like it is, as I'm sure it is this time of year in Scotland like that, and it's so changeable, and you don't want your kit getting trashed, you do rush things, you panic, and because you're trying new stuff out here and you're learning and you're shooting in a way that you haven't shot before, you know, you probably just rushed it a bit. That's all. Totally normal to do. But you've still got a brilliant image. I mean, it's an amazing image. Don't get me wrong. It's like a 9.5 out of 10, and I just want that extra half by just going. Let me see a bit more of that horizon. That's all. So the fact that you exposed it so well is really good, because it would have been so tempting to make this brighter, and you would have, I think, spoilt it. I think the mood of the scene is partly by the underexposure and the fact you've got this exquisite colour and detail in these rocks and this boardwalk and horizon. So, you know, every image can be improved. Usually, it's very rare you get perfection. But the fact that you've got something this good in really challenging weather, I think, is really impressive.
Oh, thank you. I got frustrated and then just got my iPhone out and started taking pictures.
I like your honesty, though. I respect your honesty.
Yeah, I was going to send you my iPhone photo, but I didn't want to be dishonest.
I'd have smelt a rat. I'd have kicked you off the call. This one's lovely. This is all about the exposure for the sky and the fact that the light, you know, this gorgeous colour of light is spilled onto these metallic beams or girders, and that's giving you your leading line. So, you know, if there wasn't light on this, you wouldn't appreciate the leading line on it. I'm going to do my usual. Just felt it needed correcting a little there. Just think that makes a bit of a difference. Just maybe a smidge more. It's obviously a wide angle shot, so it's contorted the horizon a bit. Maybe I've gone too far there, actually. So somewhere around there's about right. But love it. Love the silhouette. Love this. Love this. This is beautiful. Perfect exposure. Yeah, really good image. Really good.
I copied your tip of coming in from the diagonal, from the corner.
Yeah, that worked really well.
Because you mentioned that.
That worked really well, yeah, because you've got that lovely light on the rail back there, which, you know, kind of makes it. Threes, you know, I love threes, and this is, again, really well exposed. Really lovely colours, really rich colours on this one. Yeah, the only thing for me is just having if I could move the frame down that way slightly, just to give a bit more room for this mallard here, and maybe just have them moving into an empty space a bit more. That's the only thing I'd improve. The exposure is brilliant, the focusing looks good, it all looks sharp. It's been well controlled. I like the detail behind. Just want a bit more space down here, that's all. This guy's just sort of almost getting bumped out of the frame. But really, really lovely light as well in that one. So good job.
Thanks, Rafe.
No worries. Right, last few. And this one looks like one from the depth field. I know that the author, again, as before, sent in a few photos that they weren't able to send in from previous weeks. So I'm sort of looking at these slightly off topic, but this one looks like a bit of knotted wood. And I like the depth field on that, and the fact that it's sharp where it needs to be sharp, and it's well composed, and there's a bit of space, but not too much, so that works well. I really like this one with the horses in the snow. Really love the fact there's obviously three faces. It doesn't bother me that this guy's kind of blocked. I think that works really well. You've got the focus on the one in front. It's really well composed. There's no lack of, I mean, you've cropped it exactly how I would crop it, and that's where you've got a bit of space around them, but not too much. Yeah, I really do think this is a good image, really strong, and yeah, there's not much I can really say to improve on that one. It's really good. This portrait here of the author's little boy is really nice. I like this one. I'm sort of torn between just cropping in a bit on this. I'm sort of undecided as to whether I want to put his face sort of on the third, or whether I want to put him more to the side, or whether I want to just bring it in and do that, put him in the middle. I'm sort of not really sure, to be honest. I probably would crop in on this one. I don't think the thing he's climbing on is giving me enough, so I'd make it more about him and just do that. But really well exposed. You've got decent light on him, even though he's got a hood on, and the expression's great. And yeah, I think that's really good. Another landscape one, so we've got the leading lines here. I think with this one, I think your angle of attack could be a little bit better if you move maybe across, if you stepped across this way. You've got all the lines of the field kind of, you know, you maybe move forward, and if you had these lines starting in the corner here, that would add to it a bit. And you could also have this line of hedgerow sort of starting back in the corner here, so that you'd lose this bit here. It doesn't really add a huge amount. You know, because what we've got here is we've got this dark area leading off here. We've got this sort of brighter area here on the side, and we've got this sort of mid-tone bit here. And that's what we kind of want to see. So you almost want to, you know, sort of crop it in a bit like that. And I think that, you know, that just makes it instantly a little bit stronger. I don't know, again, it's difficult with some of the file sizes to tell if this is fully sharp or not, or whether the focus is maybe missed, but it's not looking really sharp in any part of it. For an F8 photo, that should all be really sharp. So maybe the focus didn't quite lock the way it should have. This one, I think, works actually a lot better. I think the lighting's really strong. I really like the detail here in the lines. There's loads of horizontal lines here that work really, really well. I love this here, where you've got these diagonal lines in the distance sort of overlapping here. I'm not a massive fan of bright green normally, but for some reason this image kind of, I forgive it the brightness in the foreground, because you've got three very distinctive layers to it, and it's been framed really, really well. You've got this bright green section, you've got this mid-brown earthy section here with the lines, and you've got the sky. And I can tell from the time of day it was photographed, it would have been difficult to retain the detail in the sky, because it doesn't look like it's late in the day or early in the day particularly, so it's always going to be a little bit blown and lacking in colour. But these two bits here work really well, and it's just a nicely divided up image. I think the composition on this is really strong, and that works a lot better for me than the previous one. This one, yeah, I can see this one was a struggle. You've got obviously a bit of an overexposure issue here, which I think you probably knew when you took it off the camera. So you definitely could have played around with your settings and got that a little bit darker. Probably because you're photographing a darkish squirrel, I imagine you were trying to make sure you didn't silhouette it. And these fellas move quickly as well, so you've obviously tried to keep your shutter speed fairly high, which you have, which is good. But it's just, yeah, there's just too many highlights blown in the background. It takes the eye away from the squirrel a bit. It's just too much sort of white going on, and it's just a bit overexposed. But I absolutely get how hard it is to photograph squirrels on the move, so a good effort anyway. Right, that is that. I'm just going to, bear with me guys, I'm going to run and be back in a few seconds, and I will answer any more Q&As when I'm back. Just bear with me. Right, apologies for abandoning you once again, guys. I'm back, and I'm back for good. So I'm here for as long as you guys need me for Q&A. So anything else, if you want me to go through any exposure triangle stuff, I'm happy to. If you've all got it and you're happy with it and you want to keep playing, please do. But if there's anything else I can help you with, guys, you've got me for as long as you need me, until my food's cooked, in which case I'm buggering off because I'm hungry. But until then, you've got me, so go for it.
I was going to ask, in the exposure triangle thing, what's the best way? Because I can see that a lot of my shots are really overexposed. What's the best way to bring down the exposure, really? Because I don't think I've quite got it.
No, that's fine. I absolutely get that. So let me perhaps explain to you my approach whenever I'm taking a photograph and see if it works for you guys. The first thing I do whenever I turn my camera on is I look at my surroundings, and the first thing I always do is think ISO, because no matter what I photograph, the ISO is going to drive how much available light there is and what range of shutter speeds I'm going to get to use in this location I'm in, whether it's in a room, outside on a cloudy day, outside on a bright day. So if you make ISO the first thing that you focus on, then you are giving yourself a range of shutter speeds and apertures that you can then play with. So I don't advise you play around with your ISO too much. You kind of want it in a place where if I go outside and it's daylight but it's overcast, and I think, right, I'm about to photograph some kids running around, or I'm going to photograph a squirrel, then I'm going to probably put my ISO at something like 1600 to give me the higher end of the shutter speeds. So that's the first thing I would do. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to consider what I'm photographing and how quickly it's going to move, if it's going to move at all. And I'm going to make sure that I can get a shutter speed I want. And then the final thing I'm going to think about is my aperture, and that's how much depth of field I want. And I always go through it in that order. And I think that if you start with your ISO, you are less likely going to experience over and under exposure the further you get in through the process of setting your camera up. And I also think it's the quickest way that if you are out on a day when it's overcast, or you're inside in a house and you know the lighting isn't going to change between room to room over the course of whatever you're photographing, you can just set your ISO and just forget about it. And one less thing, you can almost sort of just go, right, ISO's done, I've got 1600, that's going to give me a great range. And unless the sun comes out now and it gets mega bright, if you're outside, you're not going to need to change it. So give yourself less to worry about, set your ISO and then park it, forget about it. And then think about, what am I photographing? How fast is this subject going to move? And set it accordingly. Like I said before, fast moving things, sports, kids, birds, squirrels, thousandth of a second really is where you want to be aiming at, quicker if you can. If it's people moving at normal speeds, you could probably go down to 200th of a second. If it's a static object, macro photography, maybe on a flower or a landscape stuff, you could probably stop it down. You could probably bring your shutter speed down more if you wanted to. There's not a massive benefit to it, but you could do if you wanted. So, as you know, your exposure can be gained by changing all three of these things. But I think to simplify it, remove one of those things, remove ISO, and park it and say that's my ISO. And then all you've got to think about is your aperture and your shutter speed. It just makes the job a third easier, basically. That would be my recommendation, that you do that.
That sounds brilliant, because otherwise I'm fiddling so much, I've missed the picture, really.
Things, it's like, how, this is a really bad analogy that I've never heard and I'll probably never use again, but everyone can juggle two balls, right? But not everyone can juggle three. So don't make the job any harder than it needs to be. Just focus on two things. And brilliant. You will find that the more you photograph and the more you get used to lighting and different surroundings, that you'll get to a point that you'll just instantly know when you walk in somewhere or out, you'll have your default ISO number of, right, 1600. It's grey day at 1600. That gives me the flexibility. For my line of work, where I'm working at weddings, I could go from a church where I'm at 3200 or 6400 ISO to walking outside into full sun to photograph a confetti line at ISO 100. And so for me, I have like my light meter, which is my brain, it's my eyes, and that for me just, I walk around and it's bizarre. This is how obsessively anal you get with photography. Is I walk around looking and assessing the ISO of the light almost wherever I am, so that if I ever need to pick my camera up, I'll know straight away what ISO setting to go to. That isn't going to come quickly. That's going to take years and years of repeat photographing things. But yeah, to not overrate the point, Amanda, I would say do that. Just stick your ISO and forget about it, and then just play around with the other two.
Brilliant, thank you.
You're welcome.
Rafe, can I just say, I think I'm since starting this course, I look at things so differently now. I walk around, or when I'm in the car, I look at things in a very different view. You know, about sort of leading lines and composition of just everything, which I found really helpful.
No, that's great. And wait till you start watching TV again now after today. Hopefully you'll start seeing the, because you've got to think, I mean, these people that work in TV and film, you know, they're obeying all the rules that I obey in my job. They're just doing it in a motion context. They're doing it in a movie mode, you know, as a videographer or cinematographer. But the compositional and lighting elements are the same in video as they are in photography. And it's interesting what you said now, because you know, you're absolutely right. It's brilliant if you start thinking in terms of triangles and threes and leading lines and rules of thirds, and you start your eyes, which are your permanent camera, and that's on all the time, except when you're sleeping. You do start to think about it. I'm sat here now, and I'm very aware of my rim light, which is what's lighting me. I'm constantly thinking, have I got that right? Do I need to turn it down? Do I need to turn it up?
Yeah.
It's never off. This brain is never off photography ever.
No.
You know, you don't need to be like that, but it will hopefully get more towards that. And the more you think about it, like I said, I think I said a few weeks ago, every time I go out, well, not much in the last year, but you know, when we were allowed to go to restaurants, I'd sit my girlfriend in the good light, because I'd be really, you know, I'd be really unhappy if she was sat in really bad light. If I was in good light and she was in bad light, that would do my head in, because I can't look at me. So I would want her to look really, you know, really well lit.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even matter if it was my girlfriend. If it was my mum, it'd be the same. I want my mum to sit in good light. It's ridiculous. You know, the more you start thinking about that stuff,
yeah,
you apply it to your photography, the you grow.
And I'm really happy with the practicing of the water picture that I got of that small little waterfall. Well, it wasn't really a waterfall, but the water flow on the slow shutter speed.
Yeah, that worked
paid
really,
off.
worked really well. So yeah, keep going with that. That was good. I mean, that looked pretty sharp as well. So you know, that's not easy to do. It's been ages since I tried to do that, but yeah, good job.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, are you able to go over explaining metering again? Like the evaluative metering, like I don't know, it's like these little squares that appear on the screen. I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
You went past the screen slide that said partial metering and things like that.
I've not,
and how that affects the shots we take.
I've not gone into much detail on it, because metering is only relevant if you are shooting any of the semi-automatic modes. So if you're shooting in manual, metering, you don't need it. Your camera isn't metering, your brain is metering. Your brain is deciding on your exposure settings. Metering is where the camera uses the focus point. When you half squeeze on your shutter, that activates the metering. And if you're in aperture priority mode, it's going to decide on your shutter speed based on how much light it thinks that it needs to put into the frame, or how much light it needs to let into the sensor to give the exposure. So the example I think I used when we talked about it before is if you have spot metering, which is where you have I'll bring this up a bit. Shouldn't take long to get it open. So where's the metering? There. Waiting for my computer to catch up. Trying to remember whereabouts it was in the course. Oh, there we go. So yeah, so on the metering, the spot metering is where it will take a reading on just that square. So when you half squeeze on the shutter, it will, whatever your focus point or your dot, if it's on spot metering, it will be a single point in the middle. It will make a reading on what's in that square and it will expose accordingly. So if it was a blackbird on a white backdrop and you expose for the blackbird's feathers, it's going to want to overexpose the image. Whereas if you were photographing a blackbird on a white backdrop with evaluative metering, where it's reading the information in all of the squares, it's not going to expose it as much. It's going to see that there's a bright white background because some of these squares in here are going to be white. The blackbird might be in the middle here, and it will give you a much more balanced exposure. So it's going to let less light into the sensor, whereas if you do spot metering, it's going to blow the bird out. It's going to look like a grey bird rather than a blackbird, basically. Consequently, if you metered for the white backdrop and you photographed a blackbird, then it would just be a silhouette of a bird because it would expose for the white behind and it would let very little light through in the sensor, and it would be a very dark, there'd be no detail in the bird's feathers at all. So the metering is only really relevant. If you're in auto mode, the metering is relevant. If you're in shutter priority, metering is relevant. Aperture priority, metering is relevant. If you're in manual mode, none of it is relevant because you are dictating how much light hits the sensor by your combination of ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense now. Thank you.
I've tried to steer away from it, Aloho, because I didn't want to. I could spend 2 lessons talking about aperture priority mode, but you're going to be a better photographer if you shoot in manual. I believe personally. That's, I can only coach the way I believe.
Yeah, no, it's just helpful to know what it means and how it works. Because I kept looking at it and I didn't really understand what it meant. Like when I was working on my focusing, there was this point where when I was struggling with how to capture what to focus, then I went and looked at the manual and it said, oh, when you half press the shutter, this was before I had back button focusing, where you see the red spot, is where the focus is going to be. And then I was like, oh, that's how that works. And then I went back, and then by the time I put on back button focusing, there wasn't that red button anymore, that red dot that appears on the viewfinder. But yeah, it's just, I suppose it's the little things that start to make sense the more you practice.
This is part of the thing. So if you were photographing a blackbird on a white backdrop, you want the blackbird to be in focus, and the camera, you point your focus on the bird, you focus on it, the camera's also going to meter on that bird. So again, by taking manual control, you could focus on the bird, control the exposure manually, and silhouette it if you wanted. But you've still got the focus on the bird. And I think that, metering is not really helping. It's the stabilizers on the bike. It's not going to make you a better cyclist in the long term. So just forget about it. It's good to understand it. I think that what you're asking me is, what does it mean? How does it work? And I think it's important as photographers for you to understand what metering means. But for me to spend half an hour walking through all of these again, when actually I'm trying to teach you to meter with your eyes and your brain, it wouldn't make sense to do that.
Yeah, I can see that. And I was also, I think the thing that also confused me was, you know, that meter at the bottom that tells you the plus and minuses, that tells you whether you're going to have an underexposed image or no. I was like, is it the same thing or is it different? But I suppose that's the light meter. And then this one is, I don't know, like the focusing one. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think I was trying to know the
it
difference.
is all linked to it, yeah, because the camera will, again, you know, even in manual mode, it will show you, and you can have a histogram on your screen as well if you want, which is where it shows you, you know, this is like a graph, and it will show you at the highlights end if they're really going to be high. But, you know, we as creative photographers don't want everything to just be grey. Sometimes we want black, sometimes we want white, we want silhouettes, and we want, you know, overexposure. And when we let the camera decide on things, it will make things more grey. It will give you this, you know, it thinks you don't want extremes, and sometimes we do want extremes, and therefore that's why we do everything in manual, and that's why you don't panic if you see, you know, the camera telling you the highlights are going to be blown. Well, yeah, they are, because that's what we want. You know, we want to lose the sky, we want to silhouette something. So, you know, I turn all that stuff off on my screen, you know, on my camera. So I don't want the camera telling me, "Oh, you're about to make a mistake, Rafe." I go, "Hey, I got this. I know what I'm doing. I want this." You know, don't start throwing red flags at me. Those things are all put in there for people who want the camera to tell them what to do. And what we're here, as you know, I've said many times, is we're here to take control of the camera and not be told by the camera what's right. We're not trying to get perfectly balanced exposures all the time. We're trying to do what a couple of you guys did in the images you sent through this week, and that's produce beautiful silhouette photos. The camera in auto mode won't let you do that. That's why it's so hard to do good creative photography with phones, because even though they're, you know, the sensors in them are getting better and better, and you can edit quite well in them, and they do a lot of good things. You know, it's really difficult for you to take a deliberate silhouette shot with an iPhone. Trust me, you keep trying to fight it for control, and it keeps wanting to go, no, you don't want to do that, and it's massively frustrating. So yeah, anyway, I hope that was helpful.
Rafe, can I just ask one more quick question? With regarding the homework and the raw file, is that a setting that we just change when we send the photo over to you, or is it we take all the pictures in that raw mode, as it were? Sorry.
Yeah, so you've got to take them in raw. You can't convert them to raw from JPEG.
Okay.
If you dive into your menu, you should see there's a part of the menu system that has the option of having, like I said, sort of small, medium, large JPEG. And
okay.
within that, have the ability to write in RAW.
Okay.
Just bear in mind, guys, if you're doing that for the first time, once you've taken the photos you want to send me, if you then don't change it back, everything after you'll write in RAW. I mean, ultimately, what I'd hope is that you guys are going to go on and edit your own RAW files after we've done next week's session. But I'm not. Yeah. There's no expectation that you're all going to buy Lightroom and spend a load of money on that. So just remember to change it back. If you want to go back to shooting in JPEG, make sure you remember to switch it back afterwards.
Do it afterwards. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
No worries. If you need any help over the week with getting into shooting RAW mode, I should have more time over the next week. I've been busy with the flat move the last couple, but my life is starting to come back now. So drop me a note if you need me.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Cool. I've probably got time for one more question, guys, if anyone's got anything else.
Rafe, I had a quick one. I'm not sure if anyone else wanted to ask though. I'm just going to take it. The question I had was, I don't know if maybe you'll cover this next week, but I've seen like really beautiful landscape photography where you can see all of the stars in the sky and everything's just in detail. And I was wondering how they do that. I think that's called a long exposure photo. But I want to take photos like that, but I don't know how.
Okay, I'm not. I mean, first of all, I'll be absolutely honest. It's not something I do. So I'm not an expert on astrophotography. But
Oh, sorry, I don't mean, maybe I don't think I mean that. You know where it's like a landscape photo, but at night, but the sky part of the picture, it's lit up, like you can see the stars in the sky as well.
I know what you mean. That is almost a unique set of circumstances where you've got hardly any light pollution, because light pollution in most places, possibly not in parts of Scotland, but certainly around here, you wouldn't really be able to get a beautiful starlit sky perfectly exposed above Hitchin or London, Berlin, with all the light pollution going on. So when you see examples of that, it's done by people that really know what they're doing and know that where they're doing it, they're able to sort of capture almost this kind of, sort of galaxy in the background, but it's a really long exposure, and you've got to do it when it's properly dark at very long shutter speeds, probably in minutes rather than seconds, so that it can, because there's, the light in the stars is so faint that the sensor and a camera really struggles to pick it up. And I've tried, I've had, occasionally I've had wedding couples ask for, could you do a really cool photo of the Jupiter is in Pluto next week when we get married? Is there any way you can, capture it? I had one request like that a while ago, and I was very honest, and I said, I wouldn't be able to. It's not physically possible. I can Photoshop some fake stars into an image for you if you like, and make it look like that, but it's really hard to combine, 2-minute exposures with people stood in front of stars. But landscape stuff, yeah, it can be done. But my recommendation would be, because I'm not the expert on it, would be to type into YouTube and see what comes up in terms of, there's probably some more specific help videos for that. You'll need
the keywords be? Oh, sorry, say that again.
No, I'd just say you'd need a really good stable tripod if you're going to do that. One that there's absolutely no risk of any vibration or movement, because you'll be, like I said, you'll be on a minute's exposure rather than seconds. So you'll probably need to put the camera in bulb mode to do that, so you can have an indefinite length of exposure to try and bring out any detail in the sky.
Okay. So sorry, what were the keywords that I would type into YouTube for that? I don't know what it's called.
I would probably go with astrophotography to start with.
Okay.
And see, put astrophotography help video.
Okay.
See where that leads me, because sometimes you don't get the words spot on, but it leads to things that you do. You know what I mean with any searching. I give that a go. I just think you'll get better advice from them than I can give, because it's not something I've ever really tried. But don't underestimate, those photos that you've probably seen, they are not something you can just quickly go out, stick your camera on a wall for 20-second exposure and recreate. It requires a specific set of, you need minimum light pollution, you need a clear night, you need a really good camera sensor, and you need a super long exposure and a really good tripod, I would think, and possibly an inkling as to what the settings might need to be. You probably need to have manual focus engaged, you probably need to shoot at f/22. There's all of that stuff. But rather than me speculating here, I'd probably suggest, go on YouTube and see if you can find someone that's a bit more of an expert than me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Rafe.
No worries. Okay, guys, look, we've got...
Thanks for a great night. Thanks.
No worries, guys. Thanks for your input, and it's always good to have questions. I like to hear you out there. Just me talking into the abyss as always. Next week we're going to look at editing. So if you can, I'll send over on the email instructions of how to get the raw files over to me, and we'll do a live edit, and we can, maybe have the microphones on, and you can ask me questions as we do it. So looking forward to next week, and I will speak to you all very soon.
Enjoy your dinner. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.